Hello, and thanks for listening to these stories of the strange, unexplained, and uncanny. I'm John Harford, and I'll be your guide through these mists of Mirkwood. I want to mention the amazing artwork by my good friend Lauren Hottinger. She did a great job, and I hope her illustrations enhance your experience of this story. Enjoy your trip from the world of the rational into the realm of shadow reality. Stories of phantom dogs are actually not terribly uncommon. They are usually described as black, but not always. They are almost always associated with demonic forces. Seeing one of these hounds is often considered ill omen. Hearing one bay often means that the viewer or someone near to them is doomed. Phantom hounds are always considered uncanny in some fashion. It is usually quite obvious to the viewer that these beasts are out of place, and often they are immediately identified as phantasmal or from someplace else. It is reminiscent to the dog-jackal imagery tied into Damien's lineage in The Omen, as well as remarks from Arabic folklore of dogs that inhabit ruins and burial places, and are thought to assist ghouls and other fiends in their dark work. There is quite a bit of documentation about famous phantom hounds out there, so I won't go deep into detail about that here, but a few are worth mentioning. One of the earliest stories is from 850 AD in the German city of Trier. The bishop was performing a mass at a local church when a sudden storm appeared. There was significant thunder and lightning, and a dense shadow-like cloud filled the building. The ground is reported to have split open, and to the horror of the parishioners, a great black hound, bound through the congregation, ran around the altar and then from the church. In this case, there is obvious reference to satanic symbolism, but I prefer to link it more closely to the primordial identity of such beings, before Christianity satanized anything it deemed unusual or different. England has a particularly strong history of phantom hounds. One fairly typical tale of that comes from 1890. A farmer would regularly go out to milk his cows in the evening, and slip through a hedgerow to do so. One night his typical shortcut was occupied by a large black dog. As he tried to shoo the animal away, it got aggressive, and it began to grow in size. Its eyes became fiery. This is also a common feature of these spectral hounds. He fled that night, and for many thereafter would regularly find the dog haunting that particular patch of hedgerow. He proceeded to regularly take a longer route to do his chores for quite some time. Finally, one evening, he was accompanied by a friend, and they decided to go confront the dog on his way back from milking. The farmer went to the gap in the hedgerow and found the dog in its now usual spot. He put down his pail of milk and moved to confront it. As it grew in size and became fiercer, the farmer hit the dog with a stick. The dog vanished, and the farmer was stricken speechless and paralyzed. He remained that way for the rest of his days. The tale has two commonalities. The spectral dogs are often known to haunt a very localized territory. And while they act vicious and seem ghastly, they rarely actually hurt anyone unless they are touched or attacked. Physically touching or even approaching one of these beasts often leads to ill omen, harm, disease, or even death. In that way, their interactions with humans are very much like that attributed to that of the hidden people of various cultures. And it is believed that many of the earliest Scottish and Irish legends were in fact referring to fairy beings who took the form of dogs. It is also worth noting that in many mythologies, from Kerberes of the Greeks, to the Norse Garm, to the Kusith of Scottish folklore, dogs are seen as guardians of, or guardians against, passages to the underworld. They are often bound to an area near these gates between the worlds, or else associated as coming from somewhere else initially. Despite their appearance, most folklore makes it clear that these were never physical dogs, and thus are not ghosts. These tales aren't relegated to the past. They have persisted to the modern day. And while in our modern era, we'd quickly dismiss even most of our own observations as a distortion of an encounter with a normal dog, there always seems to be some quality which marks the account as unusual. As I qualify with all of my personal accounts, I'm not presuming or soliciting any explanation or affirmation, but I'll relate it as I experienced it and let you decide for yourselves. 539 is a road through the Pine Barrens. It runs roughly from Tuckerton in the southeast to Cranberry near Allentown, New Jersey, roughly in the center of the state. It is a 50-mile stretch that weaves lazily through the low, seemingly endless pines, and it scarcely passes through a town, and often snakes for miles without any buildings on the roadside. Off-season, when the summer short crowds are at home, I have traveled over half of that road in the late evening without passing another car. In the 80s and 90s, it was also the most direct route out of the then still very rural southern part of the state to what I consider the border of civilization and culture. It was one of the most direct ways to Trenton in central North Jersey. By my college years, I was driving it quite regularly to get to Trenton. That is where a now infamous underground concert venue once could be found, and I spent many nights there around that time. It was the most direct line to my family in Hunterdon County, central New Jersey, and then later to my friends in the Princeton area. I spent hundreds of hours on that road, often late at night. I saw very few strange things along it over the years. Strange lights over the woods, which could be attributed to the nearby McGuire Air Force Base. Something that upon return from said club one night seemed to buzz the car. Something that wasn't quite a bat or a bird. But those were fleeting things that can easily be explained as misidentification and roadside illusions. The encounter of interest occurred on a late night return from visiting relatives, driving south. My mother was driving, and I was in the passenger seat of the car. The year would be 1990 or 1991, and in late autumn or winter, likely around Thanksgiving or Christmas. The windows were rolled up, and we were driving at about 55 miles per hour. We were somewhere between the Manchester and Plumstead Township lines, miles 25 and 35 respectively. It was about 10:30 at night, and conditions were clear. There were two cars up in front of us. The car directly ahead of us was about 20 or 30 meters away, the other slightly further ahead. The car ahead of us suddenly swerved to the right, towards the shoulder of the road. We quickly caught up, and in the middle of the road was an animal. At first I assumed it was a deer, not an uncommon sight on 539. But instead, there stood a dog. It was standing, planted in the middle of the road, right on the line. This in and of itself wouldn't have been strange. As we slowed and drew near it, it didn't attempt to move, or look panicked, or respond in any way but to look at the car. It wasn't black. It was red-brown and had some long patches on its coat, similar to a setter. But its posturing, face, and pointy ears were more reminiscent of a shepherd. It didn't seem particularly large at first, and had it behaved even a little differently than it did, it wouldn't have been so memorable. As we pulled up to it, the dog seemed much larger. It was eye level with the driver's side of the sedan-sized car, a Nissan Altima, I believe, and it never flinched. In fact, what made the whole thing so unusual is that it stared very intentionally at us through the window. It made no movement and almost seemed cut out or rooted in place. It didn't jump excitedly. It didn't rush or back away from the car door. I'm an animal lover. I consider the animals that have come in and out of my life at least as important as most people that have. My first instinct upon seeing most stray animals is to attempt to help the animal. Nearly all encounters with these dogs seem marked by an instinctual fear of the creature. I've been up close to bears, wildcats, and wolves, and more than one of those outside of captivity. And in none of those cases have I felt real fear. Caution, surprise, but not fear. And in this dog's eyes, I can say that I saw a fiery, malicious intention. Something about this dog's stare was threatening. Its eyes were not glowing, but they did seem to shine with an intelligence you don't normally see in a dog's. My mother actually screamed as we passed by at approximately 15 miles per hour. I don't deny saying that I felt a surge of genuine fear gush up from the pit of my stomach. And why? It was just a dog. It seemed as though it was appraising prey. I could imagine that it was actually smiling as it leered into the car. After we passed it, we began talking over each other about it. What had we seen? Where did it come from? I turned around, not more than 15 seconds later, and the dog was gone. We sped the remaining 30 or so miles down to Tuckerton. I kept my eyes on the edges of the high beams. What I thought was odd as we drove home, and in the subsequent days, was that the dog just seemed to appear. The vehicle 2 cars in front of us continued straight and hadn't swerved. It was as if the dog wasn't there, and had seemed to appear in front of or next to the car that was directly in front of us. We didn't see the dog run out to the road from either side, and I find it interesting, unlike in other cases where a dog could be stranded on a deserted road, there was absolutely no instinct to stop and help it. It would be easy to rationalize it. It's just a dog. The night road, the eagerness to get home, the lonely surroundings, which were actually quite familiar to both my mother and I, caused a stray dog to seem like something more. It ran into the road and off the road and we didn't notice. Those are easy rationales. I've seen a lot of dogs, even not so friendly dogs, in uncontrolled circumstances. I encountered quite a few animals unexpectedly in lonely areas. Even when not in the safety of a moving car, they didn't inspire a reaction of real fear. I've rarely felt that at anything or anyone. In the years that have passed, I still vividly remember the face and eyes of the dog. I don't believe in the traditional concepts of devils or demons. I leave such terminology to those who see reality, and good and evil, in black and white. But I do know that what I saw that night tapped something foreboding and visceral. And for lack of a better word, despite just standing there, it felt entirely malevolent. I've researched the area quite a bit since that encounter. I've got no other phantom dog or strange animal sightings on that road on record. Outside of the obligatory Jersey Devil rumors, this lonely stretch of road seems amazingly free of urban legend and folk tales. I did have an acquaintance tell me something odd. He was stationed at Fort Dix McGuire around that time, not at all far from the approximate area of the sighting. I believe I offhandedly had asked him about UFOs or some other weird things he had heard about in the area. He told me that he had a few stories of that sort but never really elaborated. But he did know of a supposed ghost, a man in woodsy clothes that reportedly would haunt 539 and startle motorists. They say he'd appear with a wild look in his eyes, coming out of the pines. Or sometimes he would just appear in front of oncoming cars. He'd stand there, they say, staring until the car passed, and then, from the middle of the road, just disappear. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed these personal strange accounts. Please like this video, assuming you do. Subscribe to the channel and share these videos if you like them. I'm interested in any comments you have, and don't hesitate to say hello. You can also find us at mirkwood.com, that is Mirkwood with a Y, and on Facebook at our Mirkwood Tales page. Audio-only versions are available as podcasts at mirkwoodtales.podbean.com and most major streaming sites if you search for Mirkwood Tales. If you are listening to a podcast version of this now, search for the video channel on YouTube called Mirkwood Tales. You'll get some additional content with the visuals. Got a tale you want to share with me and my listeners? Send me an email at tales@mirkwood.com or through private message over at the Facebook page. Be safe, best wishes, and stay strange.